Hello one and all, welcome to the channel that is Jono's Graveyard Jaunts. We're here once again at Welford Road Cemetery on the outskirts of the city of Leicester. Although the individual who features in today's video is not actually buried here, he was born in the city and his mother and siblings are buried here at the cemetery. Today we're going to be talking about a man who was erroneously called John Merrick, but whose real name was actually Joseph Merrick. Now, most people have heard of the tragic story of the Elephant Man and seen the incredibly poignant movie about his life and death. Joseph Merrick, i.e. the Elephant Man, played impeccably by John Hurt, and the compassionate Sir Frederick Treves, the doctor who cared for Joseph whilst he resided at the London hospital, was played by the amazing actor Sir Anthony Hopkins in the same movie. And here's a brief clip from the movie about Joseph Merrick. And this superb film was made in 1980 and entitled The Elephant Man. In today's video we're going to visit the place where Joseph Merrick House once stood, formerly called Lee Street, now called Lee Circle, in the city of Leicester. I'm also going to visit the site where the former Freemans Cigar factory was located on Lower Hill Street in Leicester, where Joseph Merrick was employed to roll cigars from the age of 13 years old until he was 16. We're also going to visit the site where the Gatey Theatre once stood, where sometime between 1878 and 1884, before Joseph moved to London, he exhibited himself, showing off his physical deformities in return for money. I'll also be visiting the site where the Leicester Workhouse once stood, where Joseph Merrick for a period of 4 years in total. Finally, I'm going to visit the Merrick's grave here at Welford Road Cemetery, where Joseph's mother Mary Jane Potterton Merrick and his siblings are buried. Now, Joseph Merrick was born at 50 Lee Street in the city of Leicester on the 5th of August 1862. Joseph was born to Mary Jane Merrick, Nee Potterton, and she noticed that before the age of 2, Joseph began to develop a hard tumour in his mouth and bumps on his left side. His disorder grew much worse, and by the time he was 5 years old, he had suffered a crippling left injury to his hip. And Joseph was just 11 years old when his mother Mary sadly passed away on May the 19th, 1873 from bronchial pneumonia at just 36 years old. Joseph idolised and thought the world of his mother, and I quote, he said about her, "Peace to her, she was a good mother to me." At the age of 13 years old, Joseph left school and was required to find work like so many other children of his age. So here we are, guys. We're at now called the Lee Circle, and it was once upon a time when Joseph Merrick was born here in 1862, called Lee Street, and it's defined now by that hideous NCP car park. As you can see, it is a circular shape as we walk around it, so hence the name, going from Lee Street to Lee Circle. And what we're going to be doing now is going to be walking up to the site where 50 Lee Street once stood, and then we're going to walk down Lower Hill Street where Joseph Merrick would have walked down in 1875 at the tender age of 13 years old, and we spent a total of 3 years at the cigar factory known as Freemans Cigars on Lower Hill Street between 1875 and 1878. Before the physical deformity in his right hand got so bad, he was unable to roll cigars, so his job essentially was he would be provided with the flat tobacco leaves, and his job literally was just to roll this tobacco into cigars. But as you can see in the pictures of him, it was his right hand that was really badly deformed. His left hand was okay, and this obviously meant he had to leave the position and basically just roamed the streets for a year before he went to the Leicester workhouse, which we'll be visiting, or at least the site where it used to stand, and I'll put some old photographs up. He spent a total of 4 years there before he moved to London in 1884, and between 1878 and 1884 he would have stayed, or rather exhibited himself at the Gatey Theatre in exchange for cash, because he was so desperate for money. So we're just coming up to the site now where 50 Lee Street once stood. Now in 1873 the Merrick family moved to Cranbourne Street, and I'll show you a picture of that. I'll put up a picture so you can see. So I'll get to the opposite side of the road, and this is where the house once stood. So it would have stood here, about there where that bin is. So this is Lower Hill Street, where Freemans Cigar Factory used to be, and we'll just take a walk down it. Now we know what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a picture up of where the factory used to be. Now going this way, we're going towards Haymarket Street, and we know it was on the left hand side. Now what I want you to do is I want you to look at the photograph, and as you can see from it, there's a forecourt, an entrance into a forecourt. The building itself is U-shaped, and there's a chimney at the rear building. Now look at the plan, so we know that's the building because it's marked as a cigar factory, and on the plan you can see the forecourt, the entrance and the chimney denoted by the small square with a circle in it. So this is roughly, there aren't any clear reference points, guys, so this is the best I can do, I'm afraid. We know it's Lower Hill Street, and we know going up towards Haymarket Street there, it was on the left hand side. So I approximate about here. As I say, if you cross-reference the photograph of Freemans Cigars with the plan, the street plan from 1878, you can clearly see that's the right building. So this is where Joseph Merrick would have walked in 1875 for his first day at Freemans Cigars at the tender age of just 13 years old. Right guys, so here is where the official name was called the Gatey Theatre of Varieties, and this is basically the corner of Gladstone Street and Wall Street South, and I'll put the photograph up. It tallies with what you're seeing now. The theatre used to stand where that old sign is. It was torn down in 2012, and I just think it's sacrilege pulling all these really important historical buildings down and just leaving a used car lot in its place. So obviously it was a period building in its own right, but also with the Joseph Merrick connection. Now remember, he exhibited himself here because he was so skint in return for money. Sometime between 1878 and 1884, and we can put it on that time frame because we know he left the cigar factory in 1875, and he moved to London in 1884, so it would have been some time between that time frame. So again, that's where it used to stand, and I'll put some pictures of it up so you can reference them. It became, in its latter life, before it was pulled down, a car parts warehouse called GE, and you can still see an original iron or rather steel railing, and the windows match up with the old building, although it seems to have lost a floor. I think originally it was 3 stories high, then it became 2. And as I say, finally it was pulled down in 2012, so another historic reference to Joseph Merrick here. So this is Wall Street South with Gladstone Street on the corner there. So on a cold winter's day in late December of 1879, the young Joseph Merrick, who was aged just 17 years old, painfully disfigured, desperately in need of food and shelter, would have walked through these gates, having had to quit his job at Freemans Cigar Factory, unable to roll cigars any longer because his right hand had become so disfigured and swollen as a result of his condition. He was to join another 1,180 residents at the then called Leicester Union Workhouse, which once existed on this site. So what you're looking at now, guys, is the original entrance to the Leicester Union Workhouse. Now the gate itself isn't original, but the posts themselves are. So what I'm going to do is put some pictures up and let you have a look as to what it looked like. Now what I want you to do is to look at those posts either side and look at the shape of them with the rims at the bottom and at the top, and you'll see that they clearly are the original posts. When he left the workhouse in 1884, he contacted a showman by the name of Sam Torr and proposed that Torr should exhibit him. Now Torr arranged for a group of men to manage Merrick, whom they named the Elephant Man. So in 1884, Merrick travelled to London to be exhibited at a penny gaff shop rented by the showman Tom Norman. Norman's shop was visited by the surgeon Dr. Frederick Treves, who invited Merrick to be examined. Now Treves later recalled in his 1923 reminiscences that Merrick was, and I quote, "the most disgusting specimen of humanity I had ever seen. At no time had I met with such a degraded or perverted version of a human being as this lone figure displayed." The viewing lasted no more than 15 minutes, after which Treves returned to work. And later that day, he sent a colleague back to the shop to ask if Merrick might be willing to come to the hospital for an examination, of which Merrick agreed. Now, to enable Joseph to travel the short distance without drawing undue attention to himself, Merrick wore a costume consisting of an oversized black cloak, and a brown cap with a Hessian sack covering his face, and rode in a cab hired by Treves. At the hospital, Treves examined Merrick and observed that he was shy, confused, frightened, and evidently coward. At this point, Treves assumed the Elephant Man was an imbecile. He measured Merrick's head circumference at the large size of 36 inches, which was 91 centimetres, his right wrist at 12 inches 30 centimetres, and one of his fingers at 5 inches 13 centimetres in circumference. He noted that Elephant Man's skin was covered in warty growths, the largest of which exuded an unpleasant smell. After Merrick was displayed by Treves at the meeting of the Pathological Society of London in 1883, Norman's shop was closed by the police, and Merrick joined Sam Roper's circus and was toured in Europe. And in Belgium, Merrick was robbed by his road manager and abandoned in Brussels. He eventually made his way back to the London hospital, where he was allowed to stay for the rest of his life. An appeal was launched to raise money for Joseph, and as a result, 7 of the rooms at the London hospital were converted for a living accommodation for him. Now, Treves in turn visited him daily, and the pair developed a close friendship. Merrick also received visits from wealthy ladies and gentlemen of London society, including Alexandra, Princess of Wales, in 1887. On 3 occasions, Merrick left the hospital and London on holiday, spending a few weeks at a time in the countryside. Through elaborate arrangements that allowed Merrick to board a train unseen and have an entire carriage to himself, he travelled to Northamptonshire to stay at Fawsley Hall, the estate of Lady Knightley. He stayed at the gamekeeper's cottage and spent the days walking in the estate's woods collecting wild flowers. He befriended a young farm labourer who later recalled Merrick as an interesting and well-educated man. Treves called this one-off supreme holiday of Merrick's life, although he did take 3 holidays. Now, Merrick's condition gradually deteriorated during his 4 years at the London hospital. He did require a great deal of care from the nursing staff and spent much of his time in bed or sitting in his quarters with diminishing energy. His facial deformities continued to grow and his head became even more enlarged. He died on the 11th of April 1890 at the age of 27. At around 3 p.m, Treves, the house surgeon, visited Merrick and found him lying dead across his bed. His body was formally identified by his cousin Charles Merrick. An inquest was held on the 27th of April 1890 by Edwin Baxter, who had come to notoriety conducting inquests for the Whitechapel murders of Jack the Ripper. Although the official cause of his death was asphyxia, Treves, who performed the post-mortem, said Merrick had died of a dislocated neck. Now, the exact cause of Merrick's deformities is unclear. In 1986, it was conjectured that he had a condition known as Proteus syndrome, and DNA tests on his hair and bones in a 2003 study were inconclusive because his skeleton had been bleached multiple times before being displayed at the Royal London Hospital. Now, Joseph Merrick's body was cut up after death and some of his flesh was saved for medical purposes. His skeleton is also kept under lock and key in a small museum at the Royal London Hospital, where he lived in the latter part of his life until his death in 1890. His unmarked grave was eventually found in the City of London Cemetery on Manor Road in London. He's also buried in the same cemetery as two of Jack the Ripper's victims, Mary Ann Nichols and Catherine Eddowes. So here we are, guys, as we've already said, in Walford Road Cemetery, and we're coming into I suppose technically you call it the pauper's graves. You can see the stones are fairly, well, they're less ornate and less elaborate as the ones that we're used to seeing here. And we're coming up to the grave of Joseph Merrick's mother, Mary, who he thought the world of. There was a new stone erected in 2014 in commemoration of both Joseph and obviously his mother and siblings, and that resides as a place in front of the old headstone. So we're just coming up to the old headstone now. Now, Mary's name was Nee Potterton before she became Merrick, so we'll go up to the original headstone and we'll read the inscription, and then we'll look at the new headstone that was placed in 2014. So here we are now. We're just coming up to the Potterton grave headstone. So this was the original headstone erected. We can see the name Potterton there. We've got Elizabeth and John and Anne. And what we'll do is we'll just pan out and we can have a look at the new stone that's in front of it. And here's the new stone that was erected in 2014. Mary Jane Potterton Merrick, obviously the mother of Joseph, 20th of November 1836 to 19th of May 1873. The lovely mother of Joseph, Carrie Merrick, also John, William and Mary, and they were obviously Joseph's siblings, some of which died at very young ages. Now, Joseph's mother, as we said, passed away at 36 years old from bronchial pneumonia, and Joseph was like so many other people to join the infamous 27 Club when he sadly passed away in 1890. Rest in peace, Mary, Joseph and family.